Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Shaping Our Future Conference, National Respite and Community Care Conference 2014. It's a wonderful gathering. It's a sea of eager, keen faces ready to learn and share together over the next 2 days. As we begin proceedings for the day, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and they are the Darug people of the Eora Nation. And on your behalf, pay our respects to their elders past and present, and make welcome any Aboriginal members who are with us today as well, in particular. My name's Norman Booker, and it's my privilege to share with you over the next couple of days your journey through this conference. I'll be facilitating the process over the next 2 days, emceeing if you like, but facilitating in the sense of endeavouring to make it as easy as possible for you to get the most out of this meeting as you possibly can. It's a time for sharing together, for learning, for making new knowledge together, for supporting, for getting towards answers in an interesting, challenging time that we're all working in. I want to refer you to the welcome in the booklets from Respite Australia Association. A couple of paragraphs written by Sally and Chris in welcoming you to the meeting. And I think in typical Respite Association, they promise you 5 things, but they offer you 6. Eyeball those things and take the challenge to work up and use those throughout the meeting, because I think there's some great opportunities there. Just on a personal note, can I say that I'm in the process of recuperating from a fairly hefty bit of surgery. 5 weeks ago I had 2 knees replaced. So that might account for my hesitancy and movement a little bit. It'll go to explaining that I may not be quite as nimble as I would be otherwise, and certainly I won't be tripping the light fantastic on the dance floor tonight. I'll be leaving that to others to do and watching with great enthusiasm. But I am delighted to be here with you, and also to be giving those people who've given me lots of care and support over the last few weeks some well-deserved respite themselves. So now to some important housekeeping matters. Toilets, as you're aware, are just outside in the lobby area, in the reception area here on the left, and again upstairs for those rooms upstairs. In case of an emergency, if there's a fire or any kind of emergency, hotel staff will come here and in a calm manner invite us to move straight out through the main doors of the building into an assembly area in the middle of the park across the road. If you happen to be upstairs and that happens, use the stairs, not the lift, and assemble in the middle of the park on the other side of the road. If you have phones or other devices, can you make sure they're turned to silent or buzz so you don't disturb people around you during the course of the meeting, except for the fact that you might want to join in the Twitter conversation. This conference will be Twitterfied, if that's the right word, throughout the proceedings. There are a couple of screens here and in the foyer area and a couple of other places around the building where Twitter feeds will be fed and shared during the meeting. So feel free to join in that conversation. If you've not used Twitter, if you want some help, there will be some volunteers wearing purple t-shirts who will be wandering around with iPads explaining and helping you get on board if you'd like to start to join in that conversation. Also during the conference, Jodie will be taking photographs. In fact, she's at the back of the room now taking photographs, like the photos you saw as you came in from the welcome reception last night, and they'll be screened at various times during the meeting after breaks and so on. If you'd prefer not to be any photos, just let Jodie know and you won't be in them. They'll be used, I guess, also for the website and publications from the association after the event. All right. We now move to get into the business of the meeting, and we start with a ministerial welcome. The Honourable Mitch Fifeld, Senator for Victoria in the Australian Government, is the Assistant Minister for Social Services. He's a great supporter of carers, of carer support and of respite services across the nation. And that is going to count for a lot in these times to come as challenges roll out with the NDIS and so on. So we welcome, he can't be with us unfortunately today, but he has prepared a video message of welcome, and so we might throw to that right now. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm sorry I can't be with you today for your national conference as I'm in Canberra for the sitting of Parliament. But I did want to say a few words, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you via video link. As the Assistant Minister for Social Services, I have dual responsibility for both aged care as well as disabilities. Respite services are an absolutely vital element within both these portfolios, so it's easy for me to see just how valuable your organisation is and the importance of its work. I know that I don't need to tell any of you that the important role of carers in the lives of many Australians. Providing care to a loved one in need, whether it be due to age, disability or mental illness, is a role that many Australians will take on at some stage during their lives. And we know that it's a role that can be challenging, both mentally and physically. And that's why respite and community care services are just so important. Access to respite can help to ensure carers are able to continue in their caring role, and without it, many risk burning out. Adequate respite is, in many cases, crucial to ensuring the resilience and the sustainability of caring arrangements for many people with disability and older Australians. And that's why I'm really pleased to see that the initiative taken by National Respite to ensure respite services can adapt to the changing environments heralded by, on the one hand, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and on the other, by the Commonwealth Home Support Program and Consumer-Directed Care. This conference is an important step in helping small to medium respite providers transition to the new business models that will be required to succeed and thrive under the NDIS and the CHSP. I want to be particularly clear that respite will continue to be a key service under the CHSP. And I also want to make it clear that consumer-directed care won't rule out respite as a service. In fact, package guidelines explicitly list respite as a service option. Collaboration can play a big part in driving innovation, so I encourage you to discuss and share ideas about next steps with each other throughout the conference. I'm also pleased to see an emphasis on flexibility in respite on the program. Flexible respite will be a core component of consumer-directed care in both the NDIS and CHSP, so it's very encouraging to see the sector ready and willing to respond. Adapting to new business models and new ways of doing things won't always be easy, and the government is determined to be a constructive partner with the sector as we travel towards greater individual choice in both disability and aged care. I'm going to be monitoring the real-world effects of both the Commonwealth Home Support Program as well as the NDIS on providers and care recipients, and I welcome your feedback. Friends, consumer-directed care is the future. Public dollars should follow needs. Care should follow choice. And conferences like this with great lineups and fantastic opportunities for discussion and collaboration are just one of the many reasons why I'm optimistic that the disability and ageing services sectors will be able to successfully transition to the new world. I congratulate Chris and his staff for their vision in putting this conference together, and I also congratulate all the participants who are here today. You're here because you want to help to be part of a transition to a new way of doing things that will improve the lives of many people with disability, older people, and those who care for them. Thank you for your commitment. I'm sorry again that I can't be with you, but I thank you for the invitation and wish you a productive and enjoyable conference. Thanks very much.
I feel there made some reference to, quite a few references to the quality of the program. There's a lot of material over the next 2 days. There are a range of qualified, experienced people to share experiences with you and develop our knowledge together. Can I encourage you as much as possible? We are a large group and we have a a dense program, to be as disciplined as possible in terms of keeping to time. We want to be able to move in and out of this room and the rooms upstairs as quickly and easily as possible, so we all maximise the learning opportunities that we have together. Okay, we move now to our first speaker, and to introduce our speaker, I'm going to first introduce to you National Respite Chair, Sally Pryor, or President rather, Sally Pryor. National Respite, as you know, is a small organisation, but it's an organisation with a big agenda, and this conference is evidence of that. It's led by Sally as President, and in her day job, she is the manager of the Eurobodalla Shire Council Community Care program on the south coast of New South Wales. Sally's a leading advocate, and has been for quite some time, for person-centred practice in disability and aged care. Please welcome Sally Pryor.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the board. It's great to see so many people here. People with disabilities, carers and respite and community care services couldn't have a better friend than Bruce Bonyhady. As chair of the NDIA, he brings to his role a passion for choice and opportunity for people with disabilities and their families. He's a giant of Australia's funds management industry and a leader of philanthropy in Australia and in the new world of social enterprise and impact investment. Crucial in the Productivity Commission's report and the bipartisan adoption of the NDIS, he's our best friend both in Canberra and Geelong. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Bruce Bonyhady to provide the first of our plenary sessions this morning. We'll take a couple of questions after your speech, so please make him very welcome.
Thank you very much, Sally, for that very warm welcome and introduction. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to thank Chris and Sally for their invitation to speak at this conference, and to congratulate you on this very large conference at this very, very important time in the development of disability services in Australia. I do have a PowerPoint presentation which I will make available afterwards, so you don't need to take notes of everything I say, but I prefer you to listen to me rather than watch my slides, but they will be available at the end of this presentation. I'd also like to echo the words of the Minister and thank you for the work that you do. Providing respite, building the resilience of families, supporting people with disabilities is incredibly important work, and it's work that I and my family have benefited from over many, many years. Today, what I'd like to do is start with a description of what I think are 4 key aspects of the NDIS. I'd then like to talk about the journey so far, given that we have been operating in trial sites since the 1st of July last year. I'd then like to talk about the sustainability of the NDIS, and in that context, the role of informal care, and then within that, the role of respite, and how that is reflected in the planning process. I then plan to look ahead to transition to full scheme. So what will happen at the end of the 3-year trial period, which we are now 15 months through. I'll then make some remarks about the term respite and the importance of language, and then some concluding remarks. So let me start with 4 key aspects of the NDIS. The first point to understand is that the NDIS is set up under the NDIS Act of 2013. It sets out very clear objectives, which include scheme sustainability, that this is an insurance scheme, that the goals of the scheme are to maximise independence and social and economic participation, and it will play an important role in Australia meeting its obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Eventually, the NDIS will absorb all of the funding under the National Disability Agreement, plus some additional funding, and it will therefore absorb all existing Commonwealth and state funded disability services. And it's going to be very important that we get that transfer of funding across to the NDIS right in terms of the way it impacts on people and their families. The second point I want to make is that the NDIS is an insurance scheme. It's not a welfare scheme, it's an insurance scheme. And what I mean by that is that the way insurance schemes approach supporting people is very different to welfare. The first point to realise is that insurance schemes have built into them what is known as a prudential insurance governance cycle. So we have forecasts today of what the NDIS will cost, which is $22 billion at full scheme. So we have a set of forecasts, and now we are collecting data that will either validate or change those forecasts. We now have more data on people with disability than at any time in Australia's history. So we are better able to assess the needs of people with disability than previously. And over time, what we're going to be able to demonstrate are what are the most effective supports. Because over time, the data that we collect, the outcomes, will differ from those expectations. Will that be because the needs of people were different to what was originally estimated based on survey data? Or is it because the services that are being provided are more or less effective? So insurance schemes are data-driven processes, and over time that will lead to better outcomes and more cost-effective outcomes for people with disabilities and their families. The second critical difference between an insurance scheme and a welfare scheme is that welfare models seek to minimise costs over very short periods, typically the annual budget cycle, whereas insurance schemes seek to minimise costs and maximise opportunities over a person's lifetime. They are much better aligned to the needs of the individual and the needs of their families than welfare models. And so, over time, we would expect that the NDIS will lead to much better outcomes. We will invest in the independence and participation of people with disabilities, and similarly, invest in families, nurturing and supporting them in their caring roles. The third critical difference with insurance schemes is that they are, in addition to being data-driven, they invest in research. And you can see that in the way various accident compensation schemes have invested in research in the past in Australia. And the final point to note is that insurance companies can be, and have been in Australia, important sources of social change. We only have to look at the attitudes of drinking and driving that dominated 20 or 30 years ago and compare them with our approaches now to see the important role that insurance schemes have played in changing attitudes to drinking while driving, and therefore contributed to greater safety for all of us. It was also insurance companies that drove the fire regulations of our buildings. It was insurance companies that established the first fire brigades in our communities. In fact, the original fire engines in our communities were owned by individual insurance companies, and they would only put out the fires in the buildings that they insured. They eventually worked out that you could pool all these fire engines and put out fires everywhere to get a better social outcome. And I think there is a similar issue in relation to disability and access to community where we can play an important role. The third critical element is that the scheme, the NDIS scheme, is based on control and choice. all of the funding that we provide to people, or nearly all of that funding, will be individually driven, meaning that 93% of that $22 billion will be consumer directed. This means that there's going to be an important shift in power away from governments, away from service providers, and ultimately to people with disability and their families. This means that we are really building a whole new disability ecosystem, one based on control and choice, and also based on insurance, and also based on ensuring that the scheme is sustainable. The final point I just want to make is that the NDIS is core government business. It is an exemplar of governments doing what people cannot do for themselves. The idea, the suggestion that people could insure for long-term and permanent disability in the private market is just fanciful. The only way that societies can insure against the sort of costs that arise as a result of long-term disability is through us all contributing through our taxes, and therefore getting the pool of resources that are necessary to fund a scheme of this type. The NDIS is the Snowy Mountain scheme of social policy. In the last 40 years, there has not been a scheme of this magnitude attempted. The last scheme, of course, was Medicare, and this week we have celebrated the contributions that Gough Whitlam made to our community. Some of you will remember that part of his vision for Australia was a national compensation scheme. It's a scheme that was not implemented, but the economic foundations for that scheme are as strong as those for universal health care. In fact, the original work on universal insurance, universal health insurance by Kenneth Arrow, a US economist who won a Nobel Economics Prize for this work, included what he called insurance for failure to recover. So when we enter our public hospital systems, when we go into our health system, we expect to recover, we expect to resume full function. But for people with disability, that's not the case. And so that original work, which was done in the 1960s, envisaged the notion of national disability insurance. The start of the scheme has been very smooth, and I think that's remarkable given the size and complexity of the task that we're undertaking. And it's a testament to the dedication and commitment of the staff of the National Disability Insurance Agency, of whom I'm very proud to say over 50% have a lived experience of disability. Since the first 4 trial sites began on the 1st of July last year, and as at 30 June this year, there were 8,585 people who'd been determined as eligible for the scheme. 7,316 of them had an approved plan. In terms of their satisfaction, which is rated between -2 for very dissatisfied through to +2 for very satisfied, the average satisfaction rate was 1.66, implying an overall satisfaction rating of 94%. Total costs in the first year were $130.9 million against a budget of $148.8 million. And so we were within the funding envelope that governments had set us. Average package costs, which have sometimes been used to measure the costs of the scheme, were at $34,600, excluding a large residential facility in the Newcastle local government area, Stockton, which is distorting the figures, and with that, so that put us below the expected average cost of $35,000, which was what the Productivity Commission had estimated. On the 1st of July this year, 3 further trial sites began in the Perth Hills area of Western Australia, in the ACT, and the ACT is a whole of jurisdiction trial. So in fact we are transitioning to the full NDIS in the ACT over the next 21 months, and then a trial site in the Barkly Tableland area of the Northern Territory. And the first results from those trial sites will be part of the September quarter data that we will be publishing early next month. Part of what we've been doing is not just building the NDIS, we've been learning about it and refining it as we go. This was always expected. It was always recognised that all the analysis that was needed to ensure that the NDIS was as effective as it could be was not available before we started the scheme. We actually needed the data that we're now collecting and to analyse that data in order to refine and improve the scheme as part of preparation for the transition to the full scheme, which will commence on the 1st of July 2016. I think one of the things that's most pleasing is that the way we have been able to combine that process of both learning and building. So a number of important operational changes have been introduced and a number of those changes have also meant that the trials that we've begun in just recently have had a number of different features to those that commenced 15 months ago. Critical to learning and building, and one of the reasons why it's so important, is that it is part of ensuring that the scheme is sustainable. One of the questions that Chris set for me in preparing for today was, what is the role of informal care in scheme sustainability? And so I'd just like to set the context of answering that question by talking about the powerful demographic forces that have led to the NDIS and why it has become so necessary. Over the last 30 and 40 years, as life expectancy in Australia has increased very significantly, the life expectancy of people with disabilities has increased even more markedly, largely as a result of improved health care. As a result, for the first time in Australia's history, people with disability are in general outliving their parents. It was very different when informal care was something that you provided to a child for perhaps the first 10 or 15 years of their life, and they then predeceased you. It is very different when those children now outlive you. And of course it is one of the fears that many parents have, which is what will happen to their child when they are no longer able to look after them. And it is one of the real driving forces behind why we now have the NDIS. But as people with disabilities' life expectancy has increased, as the time when family, or the periods when families have been expected to care for their children have increased, in many cases that has proven to be impossible. And so we have had a situation where people with disabilities, where families have been unable to look after their child with a disability and have either relinquished that child in crisis, or they themselves have had to go into aged care. Because there has not been an investment in those children and an attempt to maximise their independence and maximise their participation in the community, in many cases they have moved into care that has been more costly than would have been necessary if that early intervention and investment had occurred. It is what the Productivity Commission described as a death spiral for the system, that more and more of the resources of the disability system have been absorbed by that crisis. So one of the things that the NDIS is designed to do is to break that cycle, to make the support of people with disabilities sustainable. PricewaterhouseCoopers extrapolated the trends that have been occurring over the last 20 years and concluded that in the absence of the NDIS, the costs of supporting people with disabilities would rise to between $35 and $45 billion, compared with the $22 billion that the scheme is going to cost. So something like double the costs that the NDIS will incur. So ensuring that this happens is a critical objective of the scheme. As I indicated, one of the key objectives set out for the Act and one of the key objectives of the board is scheme sustainability. One way of looking at this sustainability equation is to look at what it costs people, what it costs society to care for people with disability. It's about $40 billion cost of supporting people with disabilities. At the moment, about 20% of that cost is met through the formal care system. As a result of the NDIS, and 80% is met informally by carers. As a result of the NDIS, that equation will shift so that about 40% of the cost of supporting people with disabilities will be met by the formal system, but 60% will still be met by families and carers. And so sustaining that informal care system is incredibly important to the sustainability of the NDIS, and therefore investing in the informal care system is very important financially. But it's also very important in terms of quality. A quality life is not built on 100% formal care. A quality life is built on loving relationships, on friendships, and sufficient formal care to ensure that those loving relationships and those friendships are sustainable. So one of the objectives of the NDIS is to ensure that those family relationships and caring relationships are not burnt out like the old system has done, and that we nurture and nourish those relationships. And Respite has an important role in building family and carer resilience. But I would say that it's broader than Respite. The context is building family resilience, and that needs to be multifaceted and multi-targeted. So, in addition to providing necessary rest, ideally it also builds capacity and extends beyond parents to siblings, to friends, to extended family, and to think innovative ideas like microboards, where a group of people decide to support an individual on their life's journey. These ideas are reflected in the planning process, and I'm sure many of you have looked at our guideline on sustaining informal care. The planning process does take account of what is reasonable for families to provide. And as I said, that is reflected in this guideline. The guideline states that through the planning and assessment conversation, the delegate, so here we're referring to the delegate of the CEO because the Act gives the CEO the responsibility to determine people's packages, should establish the impact providing establish the impact of providing this informal support on the carer and their capacity to continue to provide this level of support now and for the duration of the planning period. This may in some circumstances need to be discussed in a separate conversation with the carer. Some people have suggested that carer needs should be assessed separately. My view is that this would take the focus away from the participants and under the NDIS Act, they are at the centre of the scheme, and I think this is very right. Carers can also complete a carer statement which captures the carer's goals, which impact on their informal care provisions and the sustainability of the informal care that they provide. And this can be reviewed at the same time as the participants' plans. The other point I just want to make is that Respite is now part of the services that have been bundled up. Some of you will know that when the NDIS first commenced on the 1st of July last year, there was a catalogue of supports, some 700 items, and participants chose from that list. And then, having selected from that list, they essentially had to buy those services for the duration of the plan or go back and have the plan revised. We have now moved to a situation where we've allowed certain services to be bundled. As an economist, I think of our services broadly falling into three categories. The first is capital items. So if you are funded for a wheelchair or a hoist or another piece of expensive equipment, then that's the piece of equipment that you need to buy, because we are investing in your future support through that piece of equipment. The second broad category of supports is what I would call investment or capacity building services, early intervention, therapy services. These are services that are going to produce a benefit to the individual in the future through greater independence, through greater capacity to participate both socially and economically. And I think it's important that when we are investing in people, that those funds are used for those investment purposes for which they've been specified. The third category, though, is what I would call consumption, so personal care, access to the community, access to recreation, respite services. And now they've been bundled, and so there's now much greater flexibility for participants and their families to move funds between those categories as their needs change. As part of learning and building, we'd be very interested in your feedback on how our approaches to both developing the guidelines or developing supports for sustaining informal supports, and how that rolling up or bundling of services is working. Looking ahead, the transition to full scheme will start on the 1st of July 2016. Between now and then, around 30,000 people will come into the NDIS. In the period from the 1st of July 2016, something like an additional 430,000 people are estimated to come into the scheme. This is a massive transformation, and of course the work that we're all doing now through the trial period is about getting ready for that transformation as we build what I would describe as a new disability ecosystem. I'd just like to make a few remarks about that transition, which I think are relevant to you. The first is that phasing of participants into the scheme during this period will be very important. Our aim will be to do it as fast as possible, consistent with the sustainability of the scheme. But it's obvious that not everybody will be able to come into the scheme on the 1st of July 2016. There will need to be some phasing, there will need to be some prioritisation. And through that period, sustaining informal care will continue to be incredibly important. And it will obviously still be important after the NDIS is fully implemented, but it will be particularly important, continue to be particularly important through that period. And so Respite is likely to play a very important part in that period. The second point that is important, I think, is that the NDIS one of the critical principles that underpins the NDIS is equity. Until now, the support people have received has largely depended on what the cause of their disability is, where they live, or when they acquired their disability. So the NDIS is very much about fairness. Fairness also implies that the last person to get into the NDIS in terms of their need should not have much greater need than the first person who misses out. So there needs to be equity between what the Productivity Commission called Tier 2 and what they called Tier 3, Tier 3 being those people who receive an individualised package. Tier 2 being people who don't receive an individualised package but may still have and will still have support needs. One of the reasons that Tier 2 is so important is not just about equity, it goes to the culture of the scheme. If people in Tier 2 receive a lot less than those in Tier 3, even though their needs are not very different, they will need to start proving how disabled they are in order to get into the scheme, rather than trying to maximise their independence. And in that way, the whole culture of the scheme would be undermined. The second important aspect is that if people who have support needs which are nearly as great as those that are in Tier 3 don't get the support they need, they will become more disabled and will then come into the scheme costing a lot more, thereby undermining the sustainability of the scheme, but also mitigating against the insurance principles of the scheme. So Tier 2 and what are in Tier 2 services is going to be very important to the sustainability and the long-term success of the scheme. And those services will be block funded, or could include a mix of block funding and also caseload funding. So that's an important aspect that us to consider. I'm nearly finished, don't worry. The third important point is that up to now, in-kind services have limited choice. They also don't scale, and so existing block-funded services are going to need to be unbundled as part of the NDIS. But the question is, what role will block funding have within the NDIS? In what circumstances, in what locations? The fourth important point is that market design and readiness of providers and the readiness and the availability of the workforce will all be critical, and I'm sure those issues are on your agenda, but they are very, very important. The fifth point is that we as an agency have a role that goes beyond providing packages to individuals. Our role does include the role of market facilitator. And so ensuring diverse supply, which means small providers as well as large suppliers, and retaining social capital are very important in our view. And let me just now ask the question, what is the future of Respite, given that that's what I've been asked to talk about? My answer to this in some ways is quite short. Ultimately, the market will decide the future of Respite services. Participants are going to decide. I think the participant of the future is going to be much better informed than participants have been to date, and technology will play a very important role in all of that. I expect that there will be the Trip Advisor or the Disability Advisor. I expect there will be Amazon.com-like services where once you buy a certain service, it will then predict the other services that you might need. And if you haven't looked at a US website called Patients Like Me, I suggest that you do. The second point I'd make is that it's really important in an environment of great change to know your strengths, and as we move to a market, to know your costs. And the final point I'd make is focus on what is core. one of the things that strikes me about the disability sector is that most providers are vertically integrated. My experience in business tells me that that's not the model of the future. Each organisation is going to need to determine what is core to them and what is context, and where it is context, use other providers for those support structures. Let me now just make a couple of remarks about the term respite, because I feel I've been speaking at the conference which is out of Harry Potter, the service which cannot be named. But I'd like to give you some context to why the term respite has not been used to date. When the NDIS was established, it was clear that the term respite was hurtful to some people with disabilities. And that's why it was not explicitly included in the menu of supports that we listed, although we do fund respite services. I think the sensitivity of people with disabilities is understandable, and you only have to go to the Oxford Dictionary, which defines respite as an interval of rest or relief and giving temporary relief from pain or care, to understand why there has been sensitivity. It's been part of the language of burden, which I think has been one of the most regrettable parts of the discussion of the needs of people with disability. But in preparing for this presentation, I have been in discussions with the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, and they have acknowledged in our conversations that the term respite is well understood, that the fact we have not used the term respite has caused stress and anxiety, I think particularly amongst older carers, and they're ready to support the use of this term by the agency. So we're going to have further consultations with stakeholders, because we recognise the potential importance of allowing this word to be used. But we also think it's very important that we retain the focus on building independence and participation. So this is part of what I would regard as the learning and building that we're doing as an organisation. But it's also something that I would encourage you to be very much part of, not just directly with us, but reaching out to people with disabilities, to carers and other organisations, as together we build the NDIS. So let me conclude by returning to where I started, by thanking you. And I particularly thank you because for 15 years my family benefited from respite services. The NDIS is undoubtedly the legacy social and economic reform of our generation, and like the Snowy Mountains scheme, it's being built to last, to serve future generations as well as current generations. It's an insurance scheme, it's not welfare, it's based on control and choice, and is core government business. We've had an extraordinarily strong start. Never before has a scheme of such complexity started so smoothly. And at the same time, we're learning and building, and will continue to do so. Nurturing and supporting families and carers in their roles and building their resilience is a central part of scheme sustainability, and the sustainability of the scheme is the board's top priority. The planning process does recognise that sustaining informal care is important, and I expect that in transition in particular and beyond, respite services will be important. There's a mountain to climb here. I feel like we've got to base camp, and Mount Everest still looms in front as we roll the NDIS out across Australia. We hope you're going to be with us on that climb. We'll work with us, and we truly have the opportunity here to become a global leader in disability, and I thank you for your interest and your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bruce, for setting the context for our discussion. and for giving us such a comprehensive overview of where we're starting. Our next session is going to be a little bit different in that Paul Sadler is unfortunately not able to be with us today. I'm sorry, Paul is here. Tony is not able to be with us today. So we're expanding the time for the discussion, and we'll invite questions at the end of that. Reform seems to be moving at a steadier pace in aged care for carers and respite services than for carers and respite services, but the coming Commonwealth Home Support Program is indeed a massive reform. Paul Sadler is a leader of the aged care sector on the National Aged Care Alliance. He's previously been a senior government bureaucrat in New South Wales, a leader of New South Wales Aged Care and Community Services, and in his day job, he runs one of Australia's largest charitable service providers as CEO of New South Wales ACT of Presbyterian Care. So please make welcome Paul Sadler.
Thank you, Norman. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I get to change from the focus on the NDIS to the focus on aged care. How many people in the room here have part of their funding from the Commonwealth HAC program? Smattering of you. How many with the National Respite for Carers program? Okay, and how many only do disability? Okay, so there's the majority of you are doing something in the aged care space or working in some of the related fields. What I want to do is really talk a little bit about the work that the National Aged Care Alliance has been doing in advising the federal government about the future of the Commonwealth Home Support Program. The National Aged Care Alliance is a group of over 40 national peak organisations that represent aged care providers, consumers, unions and professional associations. And it's been used as a primary consultation mechanism by the previous Labor government and the current coalition government in terms of advice from the sector about the future design of aged care reforms. The National Aged Care Alliance doesn't really have an equivalent in the disability sector. So it's a fairly unique body, and the fact that it exists has been one of the major reasons that I think elements of the aged care reforms have gone as smoothly as they have. So those of you who are funded by the aged care programs might be wondering where I got that idea from. What I'm going to do is step you through a little bit of the history of aged care reform. Clearly there are some of you in the room for whom this will be very basic, you know it all. There will be others of you who won't know the background, so it'll be helpful just to step through that. I'm then going to give an overview of the key components of aged care reform before I come to the Commonwealth Home Support Program specifically. It's important to give that broader picture because just as Bruce was saying in terms of what's happening with the disability reforms, in the same way the aged care reforms have a big picture that sits behind them, and some of what is happening at the micro level around your funding actually hangs off the big picture and what government and the sector is trying to achieve. As with the disability reforms, the reforms in aged care came from a piece of work that was commissioned by the federal government with the Productivity Commission. The Aged Care Report, Caring for Older Australians, was released in August 2011. It had a particular focus on the well-being of older people, promoting independence, giving them choice and retaining their community engagement. Almost identical to the purpose of the NDIS, when you heard Bruce describing that. The difference in the aged care context is that there was a much greater focus on individual responsibility. Older people have had a lifetime of capacity to earn, to make savings through often housing, but sometimes other aspects of financial security. So the balance that the Productivity Commission was seeking to achieve for the aged care system in the future was trying to work out what components of the system that the general taxpayers should fund and what component should actually be an individual responsibility to pay for. And then making sure there was an effective safety net for people who, for various reasons, hadn't had an opportunity to actually make enough savings through their lifetime in order to be able to contribute to their care as they age. The government's response to this was released by Julia Gillard, the then Prime Minister, in April 2012. It was the Living Longer, Living Better reform package. It complemented what was going on at the time in national health reforms, the NDIS, and a look more broadly at the economic potential of older people. The key features of the Living Longer, Living Better reforms was that it was a much more modest funding package than the NDIS. It's a $3.7 billion package of funding over 5 years, and only about $500 million of that was actually new money. The remainder was actually being recycled through the aged care system, particularly being taken through some pretty significant cuts to funding of residential aged care. And some of the measures that have been introduced, such as specific dementia supplements, were achieved through cutting the funding of home care packages, for example. So, unlike disability, where there is this proposal for a substantial increase in the funding bucket, that wasn't the situation for the Living Longer, Living Better aged care reforms. However, this was another step in the direction of a greater focus on home care, moving away from institutionalised models in the aged care context, residential aged care. There was, as the Productivity Commission had recommended, an increased emphasis on user pays. 5 acts passed federal parliament in June 2013 to enact aspects of the Living Longer, Living Better reforms. If you want to find out more what the legislation actually did, there's been a guide to aged care law that has just been released by the Department of Social Services. When the coalition government came in, they had a pre-election policy called their Healthy Life Better Ageing policy, and they have been looking to implement aspects of that post their election. It's worth noting that their overarching direction was consistent with the Living Longer, Living Better reforms, and as you heard Mitch, the Assistant Minister for Social Services, say, they're very much committed to implementing consumer-directed care, and they see that, as did the Productivity Commission, as the future direction that aged care should be moving in much the same way as the NDIS has done. The new government, and you've heard it from Tony Abbott and other ministers, has had a strong focus on cutting red tape for businesses, and that's been applied in some aspects already of aged care. There was a commitment by the previous government to put in some additional funding for wages. That, because it had a union link, the new coalition government didn't particularly like, and they changed tack on that. And that has actually been paid back to aged care providers in July this year as a increase in aged care subsidies, both through community programs and the residential care system. There was also a commitment to dementia research. And in a surprise move, because it wasn't in their pre-election policy, the government, when it came in, decided to move aged care from the Department of Health and Ageing into the Department of Social Services. So there now is an explicit link between the NDIS and the aged care reforms, because they're both sitting under the same department. And Senator Mitch Fifeld is the Assistant Minister for Social Services that's got a specific responsibility across both areas. I thought it was relevant to just give you briefly a picture of some of the key differences between what's happening in the NDIS, which we heard from Bruce about, and what's happening in aged care. The first thing is that aged care will, from last year onwards really, it applies to people gaining a disability who are aged over the age of 65. If you get your disability on your last day of your 64th year, 65th year, before you turn 65, you actually you're in the disability system, you're in the NDIS, but if you get your disability, age 65 and 1 day, you're in the aged care system. In aged care, there's only one section of the aged care system that has an individualised budget, and that's home care packages. We'll talk a bit more about them shortly. Clearly, for the NDIS, it's much more significantly individually budget driven. Although, as we heard, for Tier 2 services and some other areas in the NDIS, there could be some block funding as well. At the moment, block funding remains the primary funding mechanism for the home and community care program, and we'll talk about what's going to happen when the Commonwealth Home Support Program starts next year. Residential aged care remains as a significant component of the aged care system, whereas institutional models were already on the way out in disability and are going to be even more marginalised and eventually closed down under the NDIS in disability. Big difference. In aged care, there's a substantial co-contribution, making use of the home asset for residential care. And there's income tested, also applying for home care package. The government then funds a safety net from general taxation. Under the NDIS, there basically are no co-contributions. You may be able to choose to pay for some additional services, but the expectation is that the insurance scheme that the NDIS operates as fully funds your services. That is the biggest difference between aged care and the NDIS. We, of course, had the Medicare levy increase that came into effect this year to part fund the NDIS scheme. At the moment in aged care, we have assessments that are conducted by aged care assessment teams. Coming through My Aged Care, and at the moment for HAC services, National Respite for Carers, the service provider does the assessments. Under the NDIS model, it's the National Disability Insurance Agency that conducts the assessments. Let me talk a bit about the assessments as we get into the detail of what's happening in aged care. Many of you will be familiar with the My Aged Care website, which was launched last year, and there's a national call centre that also applies for that. That is now the federal government's primary mechanism for advising potential consumers about how to get into the aged care system. There will be new regional assessment services for home support services that will be established. We expect a tender will be released for those regional assessment services shortly. Aged care assessment teams will remain as the access point for home care packages or for residential aged care. There is to be an electronic client record introduced from mid-2015. Initially, it will be used in the assessment services and the National Call Centre. Eventually, it will be accessed by all service providers and potentially will actually be able to be directly accessed by consumers who could fill in online assessments and basically self-assess as part of entering the system. There is going to be a further trial of the assessment tool that will be used by the regional assessment services, probably starting in around March, April next year in a region of Queensland and Victoria. As part of the setup of the regional assessment services, they will also be tasked with a capacity to provide linking services, but for people who are vulnerable due to multiple different conditions. So it may be people with mental health issues as well as ageing issues. In terms of quality arrangements, from July this year, the Australian Aged Care Quality Agency has assumed responsibility for all of the quality assessments in the aged care system. So all of the home care, home support services, as well as residential aged care. The aged care system is far advanced of disability on this one because they're still working out how they're going to do standards assessments for the National Disability Insurance Scheme going forward. There were a range of other changes around quality, and one of the big moves in the future will be that there is an intention to publish quality indicators at the service level via the My Aged Care website in the future. And the government is on the verge, I think, of letting a contract for the development of that work, initially to apply in residential aged care and in the future across home care and home support. Home care packages. There was already provision through what were known as community aged care packages and extended aged care in the home packages for a level of packaged or individualised care in the aged care system. As part of Living Longer, Living Better, the proportion of home care packages is going to be substantially increasing in the aged care system going forward. And this is the one area where, going forward, and if you look at the budget projections, there is actually substantial new money going to go into the aged care system going forward. In fact, it's nearly 85,000 additional home care packages will be released over the next 10 years. As part of the reforms, 2 new levels of home care package have been introduced. So you now have a level 1 package around $7,500 per annum. The level 2, nearly 14,000. Level 3, a bit over 30,000. And the level 4 package, formerly the extended aged care in the home, at around $45,000 per annum. That is the most money you get from the aged care system to live in your own home. One of the challenges about that age 65 cut-off point is if you, for example, develop something like multiple sclerosis just the wrong side of the 65, that's the most you can get to stay in your own home. Whereas the NDIA and the NDIS, taking a different approach, doesn't cap the top service level. Although, as we heard, the average is coming out at a bit under $35,000 per annum per person. You're almost near the maximum you can get in the aged care system for staying at home by the time you've got that $35,000 from the NDIS. In order to be eligible for a home care package, you must be assessed by an aged care assessment team. They basically bundle the level 1 and level 2 together, so the ACAT gives you an approval for a level 1 or level 2 and then a level 3 or level 4. From July this coming year, all home care packages must be provided as consumer-directed care. That means they must have an individual budget with a regular monthly budget statement that's provided to the consumer. The consumer can choose how the services are delivered and what mix of services are actually provided. It's not individualised funding in the sense that the NDIA is, in that the money kind of directly links to the person. It's still, under the aged care system, an allocation to a provider in the first instance. But then from there, everything must be done as the consumer directs it to be done. There are some top-up funding and home care packages for people with dementia or cognition supplements. As I mentioned, this was actually funded by reducing the subsidy for the CACP in each levels of funding, the level 2s and level 4 packages. The department initially estimated about 26% of clients would qualify. The latest stats are that we're running under that amount. So their expectation of the funding of this has been a little bit over ambitious. It may get up to that level over time, but it hasn't reached there yet. There's also a supplement for veterans. In terms of the user charges component, there's a fee of up to 17.5% of the age pension, a basic fee that can be charged. There's now an income-tested fee, and if you're eligible to pay that income-tested fee, it actually reduces the subsidy that is paid to the aged care provider to provide the care. There's an annual cap on those income-tested fees of $10,000 and a lifetime cap of $60,000. The lifetime cap also captures any income or means-tested fee you pay in residential care, as well as the fees you might have paid in a home care package. There are hardship provisions available for people who would struggle to pay that income-tested fee. Now to move on to the Commonwealth Home Support Program. From July next year, the Commonwealth Home Support Program is due to replace the Home and Community Care Program, National Respite for Carers Program, Day Therapy Centres, and the Assistance with Care and Housing for the Aged Program, or otherwise known as the alphabet soup of aged care. There are some commitments in the budget papers to regular annual growth of these core programs, although notably the 2014 budget reduced the growth level. It's been sitting at around about 6%, 5 to 6% for the HAC program over the years, but it's down to 3.5% per annum in the out years under the federal budget. There has been no change to HAC services in most states through to 2015. In Victoria and WA, for those of you from either of those two states, there are some different provisions that apply because in both those states, the state Commonwealth Joint HAC program has continued to apply. In Victoria, that will transition to the Commonwealth Home Support Program on the 1st of July 2015. Negotiations are still underway with the West Australian Government, although it does appear likely that at some point the WA Government will agree to actually roll into the Commonwealth Home Support Program, and the state-based HAC program will cease at that point. As part of setting up the Commonwealth Home Support Program, there were specific reviews undertaken of a number of the HAC service types. I'm going to focus on what happened out of respite care because it's clearly the most relevant to all of you. But there were also reviews of home modifications and maintenance, meals, community transport, and Service Group 2, which is assessment and case management. And I will touch on what's happening with Service Group 2. I'm chairing the National Aged Care Alliance's Home Support Advisory Group that's working with the Department of Social Services on the advice to the government about the setup of the Commonwealth Home Support Program. As part of that work, we've released a couple of discussion papers. There was one on the overall design of the Commonwealth Home Support Program that was released September last year. And when the Commonwealth put out its own discussion paper, the National Aged Care Alliance has put in a response to that. I've got it at the end of the slides, but you can actually find those papers at the National Aged Care Alliance website. The Commonwealth's discussion paper for its key directions for the Commonwealth Home Support Program was released a few months back now. All of the reviews of the HAC service types are now also published on the department's website. So certainly if you haven't yet looked at that document or some of the reviews, it's well worth doing so. We're currently working with the department on the details of program manuals and guidelines that will apply for the new program when it commences. We anticipate that there should be some opportunity for some further public comment on these program guidelines and program manuals. I'm hopeful it might be this year, though every day that goes past you wonder whether DSS will actually manage to get them out before the end of the year. There is also a subgroup to our advisory group that's working with the department on a Commonwealth Home Support Program fees policy, and I'll talk about that shortly. It's worth just comparing what we recommended in our paper, the National Aged Care Alliance paper, with what the Commonwealth came up with in their discussion paper on the future of the Commonwealth Home Support Program. And a big difference was that our recommendation, our base recommendation from the National Aged Care Alliance was that we shouldn't actually have a division between Commonwealth Home Support and home care packages. Logically, there should be a single system. In fact, it probably shouldn't just be a single system for community-based care. It probably should be a single aged care system. Would make a lot of sense. But the Commonwealth hasn't gone there yet. In other respects, much of what was in the Commonwealth's paper picked up elements of our recommendations, and that was very good. The way they described the goal of the Commonwealth Home Support Program was pretty good. The way they talked about the target group and eligibility was not bad. There were some issues around the use of the term basic support, and I'll touch on that shortly. We had a series of principles that we thought the program should actually use when it was underway. Those weren't articulated as such in the paper, but many of the same themes did come out. We recommended an approach to service streams, which the department has largely adopted, but there were some differences, which again I'll talk about. We recommended there should be a strong focus on wellness and reablement of older people. The department has agreed to that. We said there should be consistency between the focus of consumer direction in home care packages and what happens when Commonwealth Home Support commences. Again, that's acknowledged by the department, but given they're not moving down the individualised budget route, it's only partial, and so there's still some tension about how that will work out. And certainly we very strongly said to them there's some big transition issues here as you move from HAC and National Respite for Carers into a Commonwealth Home Support Program, and those transition issues need to be addressed. All the key ones were acknowledged in the department's paper.
3 minutes, Paul.
In terms of the key directions, it's around the fact that there should be timely basic home support services. Now, we've said that one of the issues is what is a basic support service? How is that actually defined? And there's certainly been some toing and froing with the department around that. Sustainability gets a mention, so does cutting red tape. The wellness and reablement philosophy is certainly in there, which is good. It should be accessed through My Aged Care and be built on a robust evidence base. They're talking about clients with more complex needs will need to transition across to home care packages, for example. There should be continuity for most service types. They're talking about this program continue to be based on output-based block funding from the 1st of July, greater contestability potentially, reduced administrative burden. We provided some advice on design streams, service streams, based around outcomes for older people. We had an outcome called carer support that included both respite services and other aspects of carer support services. The department's version that they've published also included what they call care relationships and had under that flexible respite, cottage respite and emergency respite services. What did we recommend in terms of respite, getting to respite specifically? We said that there should be a carer support stream, incorporated National Respite for Carers, HAC respite and carer support, and residential care respite in aged care. Services with a respite effect, but another major focus, like centre-based daycare, shouldn't be in this stream, but should be funded somewhere else in the Commonwealth Home Support Program, was our advice. Consumer direction philosophy should underpin the services. We should be looking at streamlining emergency respite access, taking the opportunity to do that as part of this new program. Expanding flexible respite, especially for working carers and special needs groups. Limiting the amount of respite available per person. And effective linkages with home care packages, carer support centres and the aged care gateway. What has the department said? It's going to streamline services according to the discussion paper into 3 for respite, flexible respite, which would include all the services you can see on the screen there, cottage-based respite and emergency respite. And the discussion paper makes it clear that Commonwealth Carer Respite Centre funding would come over to the Commonwealth Home Support Program and be aligned to the emergency respite funding under the new program. And as we had recommended, they're talking about centre-based day respite, etc., going under social participation. In terms of carer support, Living Longer, Living Better flagged the creation of carer support centres. The department has commenced a process to review how carer support might be structured now that aged care is sitting in with the rest of the DSS portfolio, including mental health and disability. The department's taking the opportunity to look at how carer support might be structured across all ages and carers of all groups. It is unclear what this means at this point for the future of HAC-funded carer support services. We really don't know. Will they be transitioned into Commonwealth Home Support Program, like the Respite services clearly are going to be, or will there be some new carer support model which those HAC-funded carer support services might transition across to? We do know the department is aiming for a new model to be in place by July 2015. In terms of fees, we're looking at a nationally consistent fees policy. One of the big drivers here is the different costs that apply for fees in terms of home care packages and the current HAC program. And there's disincentives for people to move out of HAC into Commonwealth Home Support because they pay a lot less in the HAC system. Contestability. There's a number of aspects in the paper. What we do know is that it appears likely that, as the paper has outlined, there will be contestability for regional assessment services, sector support and development roles, probably early next year, and all future growth funding. How much further there might be market testing or contestability, we don't know yet. One issue on transition, just to close, that I want to point out to you is the National Respite for Carers program, where we've got clients under the age of 60 who are cared for. We don't quite know what will happen. There's going to need to be some transition for those clients because it's clear that the Commonwealth Home Support Program will be focused on the clients aged over the age of 65. So there will need to be some transition and discussion about how that relates to the NDIS and state government programs. So, to conclude, at the moment, no one's funding in this room is guaranteed past the 30th of June 2015. However, on the positive side, change in aged care is likely to be evolutionary, not revolutionary like the NDIS is being. And while the details are still to be settled, the scope of home care and home support programs is gradually becoming clearer. And Respite, as the Minister said, will be a part of the Commonwealth Home Support Program. There is no question about that. I understand there have been rumours to the contrary. They're wrong. Take it from me. And the Minister. Are you ready for all of this? Are you going to go it alone as an organisation? Are you going to partner with somebody else to get through all of this? You're going to merge if necessary. Looking at the program, they're the sorts of debates and questions that you'll be looking at over the next 2 days, how you do prepare for the future in the NDIS and in aged care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul, very much. You've answered questions, you've raised questions. I'm sure there's lots of bubbling of discussion that needs to happen. We might take time for just one quick question from the floor in terms of a point of clarification or amplification from what Paul said. Can you stand and identify yourself and use a really strong voice so that we can all hear? There's a mic for you there, Jenny.
Thank you. Yeah, Jenny from Port Macquarie, and I'm the chair of the board of a Disability and Aged Care Community Service. Paul, this split between aged care and disability, as you're aware, being in the aged care sector, there's a significant number of people in aged care services, particularly residential services, who are under 65. They are aged care is the only option for people needing residential care. What future do you see with this split? Will people with an acquired disability, be it chronic illness or stroke, dementia, etc., acquired before 65, still have access to the aged care system? And how will the cost shifting work?
Under the current arrangements, if a person under the age of 65 actually accesses residential care, the state governments are now paying for that, and the NDI NDIS will pay for it in the future if the person is then deemed eligible for the NDIS services. In terms of what happens on the ground, well, I think what we'll see is that the NDIS will do a much better job of keeping those people out of residential care than the state-based systems ever did. The reason a lot of people who are younger go into residential aged care was because there was no appropriate disability services for them, not because it was the best place for them to be. So I think we will see less of those people. It doesn't mean there will be absolutely none. There may still be some who come in, but there will be less of them, and substantially less potentially as the NDIS rolls out. In terms of if you need aged care expertise as part of your support package, and you've got a dementia or some other disability which has got an age-related component under the age of 65. One of the groups I sit on in New South Wales is called the Futures Alliance, and it's a group of organisations and individuals who are interested in exactly this issue. We're actually running a session with the Australian Association of Gerontology in the Hunter, looking at what's happened out of the Hunter trial site and particularly what's happening around the people around that age cut-off, because it's clearly one of the issues that needs resolution going forward. I'm not convinced that either the aged care system or the disability system's got it right yet.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks. Now, there are no doubt lots more questions. Use the Twitter feed to pose more questions. Use email. You can email any of the staff at the Respite Care Association and answers will be given to you by the end of the conference. You can also use post-it notes. There's a board outside near the registration desk where you can stick a question you have, an observation you've made during the plenary session or at any point during the conference, or an insight that you've gleaned along the way that you would like to share. So that's a service for you in the conference.